The Caribbean is now the center of a geopolitical standoff that could redefine Latin American power dynamics between the United States under President Donald J. Trump and Venezuela under President Nicolás Maduro. As U.S. military deployments surge and Washington weighs hard options, Caracas braces for what it calls imperialist aggression, even as rumors swirl of possible exile for its embattled leader. In recent weeks, Washington has steadily escalated its pressure on Caracas, deploying a significant naval and aerial force to the Caribbean and ramping up a drug war campaign that critics argue is morphing into regime change efforts. According to multiple U.S. officials, the United States is preparing for a new phase of operations targeting Venezuela, a move widely interpreted as laying the groundwork for efforts to remove President Maduro from power. The administration has formalized its hardening stance. It has designated the Cartel de los Soles, which U.S. authorities allege Maduro leads, as a foreign terrorist organization. This reclassification opens the door to new actions, including strikes against the group's infrastructure and assets. On the ground and at sea, the campaign is already underway. Since early September 2025, the U.S. military has struck multiple vessels suspected of involvement in drug trafficking. Those maritime strikes have reportedly resulted in dozens of casualties, as Washington claims to target narco-terrorist networks operating in and around Venezuelan waters. In a statement that underlines the administration's stubborn resolve, the U.S. President recently said, "We may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out," while not ruling out diplomacy. Trump made clear that pressure on Caracas will continue and that the U.S. is keeping its options open, including military ones. In response, Venezuela has moved quickly to signal readiness. The government has launched a widespread mobilization of civilians, bolstering its militia forces and conducting military drills, steps the regime insists are necessary to defend national sovereignty against a looming American attack. One government official described the mood on the ground. People still go about their daily business, working, studying, socializing, yet we are also getting ready for any scenario. In states along the Caribbean coast, authorities say they have put entire community circuits on alert, deploying militia members and conducting nighttime training sessions, drills and mobilizations. Official statements from Caracas have framed the U.S. military buildup as a veiled attempt to seize Venezuela's oil and natural resource wealth. Maduro and his government repeatedly accuse Washington of weaponizing a war on drugs narrative to justify regime change under the guise of anti-narcotics efforts. Amid this mounting tension, a startling report has emerged. According to recent intelligence cited by U.S. officials, President Maduro may be planning for exile, with a U.S. allied nation potentially ready to offer him refuge. As reported, one strong candidate is Turkey, a country with existing diplomatic and economic ties to Venezuela, whose leader, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, had earlier congratulated Maduro following his contested 2024 re-election. Should such an exile scenario unfold, it would mark a dramatic turn from Caracas rallying a nation under arms to the possibility of its president seeking shelter abroad. The prospect alone speaks volumes about how serious those within and outside Venezuela consider the risk of regime collapse. Even as the U.S. tightens the noose, signs of possible back channels are emerging. In mid-November, President Trump told reporters that he sort of made up my mind on Venezuela, but left the door open to direct talks. We may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out. These statements suggest contrasting, even contradictory impulses within U.S. policy, the continued military buildup and strikes on one hand, and the conditional openness to diplomacy on the other. From Caracas, the message is one of defiance, but also caution. Venezuelan authorities claim they are prepared to resist militarily, even if that means taking to guerrilla or sabotage tactics in an asymmetric fight. But they also emphasize that much of the current mobilization is about deterrence, not provocation, calling on global powers to respect Venezuela's sovereignty. This standoff, naval deployments, missile threats, civilian mobilization, potential exile carries weighty implications, not just for Venezuela, but for the broader region and geopolitical balance. If the US acts on its threats and launches strikes or even attempts a regime change operation, it risks triggering a humanitarian and security crisis. Venezuelan forces have reportedly considered guerrilla-style resistance and even plans to anarchize the country to repel any foreign occupation. On the diplomatic front, regional responses have already fractured. Some Latin American governments have criticized the strikes and the US operations, warning of the risk of extrajudicial killings and destabilization. Others, especially right-wing or US-aligned administrations, have remained muted, wary of economic retaliation from Washington. Back in the US, policymakers and lawmakers face a tough calculus. Can the war on drugs narrative justify military actions that could violate international law and provoke a broader regional backlash? And if Maduro is displaced, who fills the vacuum and at what cost? What we see today is a paradoxical policy. On one level, the Trump administration appears committed to using force, designating Maduro's network, terrorists launching strikes, positioning warships, readying intelligence operations. On another, it leaves the possibility of diplomacy open. As President Trump himself put it, the US may be having some discussions with Maduro. Yet the scale of military deployment and the string of strikes suggest Washington is preparing for far more than negotiations. For Caracas, that dual signal has had a unifying effect. Despite internal dissent and economic hardship, many Venezuelans now seem prepared to rally around the government in defense of national sovereignty. At the same time, the reported contingency plan for Maduro's flight abroad, possibly to an allied nation, hints at just how fragile the current equilibrium might be. Even the threat of a power vacuum spawns uncertainty. There are several plausible scenarios unfolding on this razor's edge. A negotiated exit or exile for Maduro under intense US pressure and the spectre of strikes. Maduro may accept safe haven in a friendly state, preserving his personal safety while averting widespread conflict. Escalation into a broader conflict. US strikes could widen, perhaps targeting land-based infrastructure or military installations. Venezuelan forces could respond with asymmetric tactics, leading to a prolonged, destabilizing conflict. Some kind of negotiated settlement, diplomatic back channels could lead to a power-sharing deal, elections under international observation, or a transitional government, though trust on both sides is minimal. Protracted stalemate and simmering violence. Even if full-scale war breaks out, Venezuela's degraded economy, fragile military capacity and social divisions could result in protracted guerrilla warfare, civil unrest and displacement. What is clear is that the coming weeks could define the fate of Venezuela for years and mark a watershed moment for US foreign policy in Latin America. We may be having some discussions with Maduro, and we'll see how that turns out. US President Donald J. Trump. If the imperialism of the USA tries to attack Venezuela, we'll know how to answer, and we will prevail. These statements, emblematic of both brinkmanship and uncertainty, capture the tension at the heart of this crisis.